and also maybe be well accepted in the country, which is your home for a few months, and making sure that you are in good stand in terms of visa and all those little things which can complicate Fulbrighters, researchers' life. So really, I would like to thank you for covering this topic, becoming, no, this one. Papi, can you give me yours? Thank you. Black hair is the root of Pan-Africanism. My colorful Nana. Nana is Nigerian. Or Ghanaian. Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be Ghanaian. Wow. For grandma. Oh, that's very interesting. No, I know that because I tend to be a specialist of Ernest Gaines, but in Ernest Gaines it is Nanan. There is an N at the end, and it's Louisiana, right? And all the great aunts are grandmothers. In the case of Gaines, it is his great aunt who is now the grandmother. Grandmother hair, grandmother, the one who supports you. Because when it is so hard, remember that one? So hard, the soul of black people, the soul of black people. So hard that you have so many holes in your shirt that even a blind man can't see. So hard when you get snakes going around in the house and you need to work with them. But also my memories, my sisters, elder sisters, going to some celebration and having that iron comb, working on their hair to make it all glossy and shiny. Right now, hair is now cropped. You prefer to have them just like this, just like dreadlocks. That's the fashion. What happened when they were coming? Why did they do it in the US, but here too? But why are we going back to what it should be and what it should never have stopped being? Grow it as it is, cultivate it as it is, just like the Fulani herdsman having his dreadlocks, or dreadlocks in Ethiopia, or dreadlocks, you know, in the mountains, right? In Jamaica. The Cimarrones in Jamaica, those living in the mountain, jumping like burning spear, Bob Marley, etc., etc., but never to be conquered by the British guns because they were on the top of a mountain and nobody could ever think about fighting them. So that's, you know, that's the general background of what you are going to talk about. Now, I am not going to do like those hard-hearing professors all the time, blah, 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 and never listening to the others. I am going to stop my spiel around here right now and give you the floor and thank everybody. Thank Jada, you are always around here. I appreciate. Tell all the Fulbrighters to be here all the time. I really appreciate. So thank you very much, everybody. I would like to thank the Fulbright team operating from work, Mamadou Bojan, Dr. Bojan, Marianne Yard, always available to help, and Aliun also, who is all the time in the office. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending, and I recognize my good friend with a heart around here. Thank you. Okay. I'm sitting at the back. Okay. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. So first of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm absolutely overjoyed to be here and sharing space with you all. This project has gotten so many unexpected turns, and I'm going to share a little bit about that. And then Professor Cork is going to do a great job bringing it all together to determine why we're here. So first of all, the other Fulbrighters are here. So thank you guys so much for coming. They came from San Luis and Ches. So thank you. And then I have family here, and they came from the States. So thank you guys for coming. So during orientation week of Fulbright, I remember when Alioune and Professor Bodian came into our conference room, and they started talking about work. And they were like, work, we do research. We talk about the West African Research Center, and we want to connect everyone and do community. We have this library. And I was like, I need to be there. And so I remember kind of tackling down Alioune and being like, what do I need to do to work with you, to be near you, just to understand more of what you guys do in this space. So this is really, in my own way, a dream come true to be presenting at Works Research Center now 5 months later. So I really appreciate everyone who is here. Okay, this is going to be interesting. Okay, so again, my name is Lauren. So I'm a current Fulbright English teaching assistant here. And then on the side, I pitched My Colorful Nana as my community engagement project. My Colorful Nana is a project that I started at NYU during my sophomore year of college. So I will get into that in our next slide. But to start, this is my Nana, Joyce Brown. It is a picture of her from 1963, and she's absolutely gorgeous. And this quote that says, Black hair is the root of Pan-Africanism is a quote that Professor Korka shared with me when I was interviewing her for a podcast that you all will hear shortly as well. And when Professor Korka said these words, I was like, that's why I'm here. Like, I didn't know why I was here, but I'm like, that's a large reason of what I want to do. And I'm excited to just share that with you all today. Okay. Okay. Let me do this. Whoa. So briefly, Professor Corker, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah,
and thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's my pleasure to be part of this conversation. I remember when I met Lauren, she was like this enthusiastic, person was like, let's talk. And I'm like, yes, let's do it. So we were talking about, identity, formations. We were talking about her experience in Senegal. We were talking about my experience in the US doing my master and PhD, and then like coming back to Senegal. So we were just having this rich conversation in the podcast, and we had, I think, more than an hour of conversation of just like nonstop. And I said, I'm tired now. Let's go have lunch, and then pick it up again. So yeah, this idea really came from her. That's what I told her. I told her that you already had everything in you. I just, we were talking, and I just maybe pushed a little bit, and I was like, we have to do something at work because, beyond the podcast, you want to really positively impact people's lives, right? Identity, the way that the world is going, we just always need a reminder in spaces to discuss, our experiences. So my name is Korkasal, and Professor Sen, I think, introduced me already. So I'm the Assistant Director for the Minnesota Studies in International Development. It's a study abroad that comes to Senegal fall and spring. And I work with a team about 5 people, and then we just usher the housing and accommodation, faculty, and all that, all the logistics, and also, of course, courses and the academic side. So I am a mother of 3, and they were like, when I was doing grad school, that's when I had all my babies in the US and then came back. That was like a long journey that ended last year. So I came back last June to Senegal to get this role. I was already familiar with work because I was working here for 3 years before going to the US. So it was really a nice feeling to be back in the family, but also to be doing study abroad and to meet people, amazing people like Lauren, and then discuss all these amazing things. So
No, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it for me.
Amazing, amazing. So Professor Korka is going to speak more about the Negritude Movement as well as Pan-Africanism. If you don't know what that is, she does an amazing job of diving into everything about it. So I'm excited for you all to hear that, and then hopefully think of that relationship to Black hair and then familial connections throughout this conversation. So for me, when I first got to Senegal, I was applying to PhD programs, and my Fulbright team over here knows how stressful that was for me. And then about 3 months into my grant, I learned that I was going to get my PhD. And Professor Cork and I are both getting our PhDs in the English Literature Department, or she got hers, but I'm going to make it. So I'm very excited to continue my Kalphanana at the graduate level as well. So what is my Kalphanana? My Kalphanana is a couple of different things to me in a personal sense, but also in a creative sense. You're going to see Janai do some art shortly. And my Kalphanana also is just a space for community engagement. So the fact that there are faces here that I don't know, I love that. And I think that's where the growth happens. And I think that's where the conversation can go further. So my Kalphanana started when I was a sophomore in college, as I said. My dad was actually with me when I found this first picture of my grandmother, which I just want to pull up for the effect. So this is my grandmother in 1963. And I remember when I was looking through her closet, I found this photo of her. And I was like, Nana, who is this? And she goes, Lord, that's me. And I was like, Nana, like, what? And I was like, can I have it? And she goes, no. And I was like, okay. So I just started taking pictures of it. And then I took that picture and I put it next to a picture of my brother as a baby, next to a picture of my first pet, next to a picture of me, my mom, my dad, and my brother. And just like, there was just this like image of all that I am, and then so many thoughts in my head of all that I wanted to become. So to add in that space, the personal element of my Kalphanana, I grew up in Westchester, New York, and it was a predominantly white community. Aside from my skin color, my hair was the other point of differentiation that created a lot of contention inside of me and with others, and I didn't have the language to understand why. So when I was a sophomore at NYU, I took an oral history course, and the professor said, okay, I want you to do a project, a final project on something that inspires you. And I was like, something that inspires me, okay. Well, I think a lot about my hair, and not in a good way at the time. So I was like, okay, but I remember I found this picture of my grandmother, and look at her, like, you know, so I was just like, how could I not want to do something like that? So I went back to my professor and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this podcast about Black hair. And I was like, yes, that's a great idea. And then she started listing off all the scholars who have done work on Black hair already. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that then. Like, I want to be an individual. I want to do my own work. And so she was like, no, Lauren, but you haven't done this work yet. Like, your voice hasn't done this, your perspective, your story. And I was like, that's a good point. So I was like, all right, okay. No, so I ended up continuing the podcast. I interviewed my dad, my mom, and that was interesting because they knew me growing up as a child, what my relationship to my hair was. And it was awful. It was literally, look at him laughing at me. It was awful, like tears, constantly not feeling like I look like everybody else, just not understanding why I had this hair, there's a gap in my understanding of who I was. So when I saw this picture, it's like emotionally those things started to connect, but linguistically that didn't come until really like right when I'm sitting here and I met Professor Korka and she said that Black hair is the root of Pan-Africanism. I'm like, yes. So I ended up interviewing my dad, my mother, my hairstylist at the time, a white girl, a girl who was half Black, half Thai, a girl who was half Black, half Hispanic, and a girl who had dad, who's also Black. So it just created this really interesting conversation. I don't think I really knew what I was going for at that moment. I just wanted to hear your thoughts. Like, what are your thoughts on Black hair? Everyone seems to have thoughts on it, but we don't have the words to talk about it in the way that I thought I needed as a kid. And then I was like, oh, you think this way too? Like, you think this way as well? This white girl, you don't have Black hair, but you still have thoughts on this, but we don't know how to talk about it. Like, what? So it just like lit something in me, and I can't get away from that feeling, which is why I'm here today with you all. So, my call for Nana is now my community engagement project for Fulbright. I'm primarily an English teacher here, and then I do my call for Nana to keep up with all of these brilliant people and find ways to engage with the community in Dakar. So I was fortunately able to interview Alioune, who's over here, Professor Korka, and Professor Mamadou Bodian. Together, we talked about Black hair as well as various experiences in relation to identity formation and the concept of generous thinking. Generous thinking, that word, so I love my professors. So they, I'll reference them a lot, but a professor once said to me, Lauren, you think very generously. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but I like it. And I don't know, like, I just loved it. And I think in doing this work, I realized that to think generously is to do what this is. It's when Professor Korka takes time out of her day and wants to sit down and talk to all of us. It's when my friends come from work and want to hear something that they don't relate to directly. It's sharing space with people of different cultures and identities than you are. So I think everyone here is a generous thinker, and I'm just grateful to be a part of that with you. So we're here today to talk more about generous thinking. And again, Professor Korka, thank you so much. You are inspiring, and that is a moment I'll never forget when you said, you know, like, you can do this, like, do the event. I believe in you. I was like, are you sure? But here I am. Here we are. So thank you. You're welcome. Okay. So first things first, and if I'm ever talking too quickly, just slow me down as well. And I'm happy to slow down. Okay, so first things first, we're here to talk about Black hair. You know what? I'm sorry. I want to look at my slides, and I feel like I can't do it looking at that. This is so much better. Okay. So first things first, we're here to talk about Black hair, Pan-Africanism, language analysis, and identity formation. With the idea of Black hair, that's my story. So it's a way of how I began to formulate a true interest in a lot of these topics that we're going to dive into. Pan-Africanism, Professor Korka taught me most about this topic. I feel like I've always been aware of the term as an umbrella term, but I didn't understand all of the players and key players that are talked about in a historical context or get left out. And Professor Korka has spent her life's work making that clear, and finding that through line between Black hair and Pan-Africanism has been fascinating. Language analysis. So again, I'm primarily an English teacher here, understanding the way that we structure our words, we structure our thoughts, how certain concepts exist in Wolof or French or English vary, and then some concepts don't exist in the opposite language or the opposing language, was fascinating to me. So a lot of our work will revolve around that as well. And then identity formation is kind of another umbrella term that I hope will bring this topic to light. Why are we the way we are, right? Why did you choose to wear that black jean jacket, right? Why did Laura choose to wear that flower coat? I want to, or you know, button up. I want to understand that. I find that fascinating, and I think it goes beyond facets of hair, but I think it's easier or more palatable to talk about these conversations when we think of something that we can all relate to, which is hair. Okay, so art. Michael Fanana, we believe that creative work, academic research, and activism are inextricable, meaning you can't have one without the other. Thank you. I was like, you guys can see this. Oh, wait, no, I can. Thank you. Whoever. What a brilliant idea. Who knew? Thank you. Okay. All right, so with my colorful Nana, we believe that creative work, academic research, and activism are inextricable. So I have a lot of stories, but I had a boss one time. And I love him. He's an artist, and he lives in New York City, and he has a studio. And it was my first internship in college. And he's a historian, but untraditionally trained. Yes, Katrina. I met Katrina. She's also from the States, and she knows Kamau, who was my boss. And he said to me, he knew I was interested in art, and he knew I was interested in writing and research and all these things. And I didn't know how to combine all of these ideas together yet. I just didn't know it was possible. And he told me once, he's like, Lauren, like off the fly, we weren't really talking, but he was just like, Lauren, just so you know, if you get your PhD, you're not going to be able to do art in the way that you want to. And I was like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. And so that's what a lot of this is. And I know that he also finds ways to do academic work and art, but I constantly want there to be a through line. You can't have art without activism. You can't have activism without creative work. So all three go hand in hand. So with that being said, Janai Cash is a lovely individual who has written us 3 pieces. And I'm so excited to hear her present. Janai, what else can I say about you? Please, if you feel free to come up. Is that okay? Cool. Yeah. Yeah, mic going for yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Miss Cash.
My name is Janai. I am it's on there. Yeah. I am a teacher from the city of Philadelphia. This is my 3rd time here in Senegal because it's such a lovely place that we all want to return to. And so I've been teaching for 8 years. What I teach has transformed over the years, but for the last 4 or so, I teach a social justice course. And in our first report period, one of the questions, our guiding questions that I ask my students is our identity static or can it be changed? And so when Lauren shared with me the theme and, the 4 pillars in which we would be discussing today, one of the things that stuck in my mind the most is identity is something that we talk about a lot of times in definites, but with our hair and anything else, it is consistently changing. It's not static, it's something that changes over time. And so when Lauren volunteered me to share some pieces here, one of the things that I thought about the most was what periods of growth have you gone through, right? In 2020, before shutdown, I had already started to think, how are you growing in this moment? The city of Philadelphia was changing. My relationship to teaching and my students was changing. And I was going through all of these things. And I'm like, the one thing that you really like to do since you were young was write, right? So why don't you honor that? And so I found some writing collectives and some groups to go to. And at that time, the only thing we were writing about was change. And so the 2 short pieces that I'm going to share right now came out of a weekend of words that I did with the Shuffle Collective. And so with that weekend of words, I'm like, wow, what's one word? Y'all remember in 2020 when everyone was using the word novel, just over and over and over and over, and you heard it more than you had ever heard it in your life. And so that was a word that I focused in on. So that's the name of the first very short piece that I'm going to share with you all. All right. Okay. So, a rose for you, you novel beauty. Born in an unforgettable way, but what is born to be forgotten? The ancient dance of life and fertility revolutionized, bringing forth new being from our fingertips, the measure of many wrapped in production. But who are we when there's nothing new to produce? What will be the fruits of the new world? our beauty and landscape literally and figuratively masked, germinating new order through forced reflection. This pause birthing pain and feelings that lay dormant, gestating, forcing us to face a new version of ourselves, rewalking paths once familiar to us, but through a new life, springing vocabulary and new words from new tongues and thin air. How will those who come after us make sense of the vestiges of a world gone before them? Where does all this newness fit? What a time to be born, to be new. What a time to be alive. All right. Your girl was stuck in the house for 3 months. I was just like, going crazy because I'm like, who are you if you're not doing something, All right. So in keeping with some of those themes of growth and difference and, travel is a way that I experience and make sense of the world. Senegal was the first country I got the opportunity to travel to through a study abroad here at work, which is why Dr. says that I'm always here. And so I started thinking about how I travel through the world, and that's where this came from. So the name of it is Travels. All right. So this body, it travels, boarding planes between joy and grief, longing to make sense of the journey, falling through planes of time like an existential trip, in and out of different versions of herself, knowing all parts and nothing. And in this way, everything is connected in the obscurity of the journey. Where do the lines blur in this body? Creating a Berlin conference of boundaries, messy and unsure, volatile and presumptive. The newness of who you are constantly thrust upon you by the foreign, changing what should be familiar into unknown territory. In this geography, there is no internal GPS. The body's North Star, constantly dimmed by worldly pollution, clinging to roadmaps in search of paradise lost, of purity lost, of direction lost. This body, it travels with fragile and burdensome luggage between clarity and confusion, lost and found, Jezebel and Madonna, desirable and repulsive, creator and destroyer, human and God. And in this way, everything connects in the journey. All right, thank you guys.
You're gonna read the third one, yeah? But okay. So we'll give Janelle a little rest. Those are absolutely beautiful. When I read them, I was like blown away. Okay, so I love poetry as well. So I'm going to read 2 poems that I've written since living here. And then we'll hear Janai again. Okay, so the first poem is called My Little Balcony. And I start with a quote by Bessel van der Kolk. I don't know if anyone has read The Body Keeps the Score or has heard of it, but he's a really impressive doctor, MD, who says a lot of interesting things. Okay, so his quote: gradually, they started to realize that it is normal to simultaneously experience conflicting feelings or thoughts, which gave them more confidence to face the task ahead. And then here's the poem. You stare at me on my balcony, sipping coffee. I watch you on the side of the street, rubbing dust on your cheeks. It makes me uncomfortable, guilty even. All I wanted to do was enjoy my coffee. You keep staring. I wonder what you're thinking. I wonder who you think I am. I wonder if I'm an intruder in your mind. I get scared of the off chance that you don't like me. I get scared at the off chance that then I won't like myself. I consider offering you some coffee and quickly remember that that doesn't make sense. That wouldn't make sense. A few minutes pass and I watch you get up to beg for money. You look up and steal glances at my little balcony. The guilt rushes back to my insides. So I take a sip of coffee. A light morning release, normalcy perhaps, but not actually. If I go inside, I'll know that you're still there. I've seen someone like you every day since living here. Sometimes I give money, sometimes I don't. Sometimes you follow me, sometimes you don't. Sometimes we stare at one another, wondering who we are, perhaps equally as frustrated that we're acting as invaders in each other's homes. Quietly, you stand, you get up, you walk away, then leave. And finally, I can finish my coffee and try to sit comfortably in your home. Thank you. So the next poem is a bit different, and it's called "To Be Extraordinary." And I start with the same, not the same quote, a different quote by the same indie psychologist guy. So he said, "Trauma confronts us with our fragility and with man's inhumanity to man, but also with our extraordinary resilience." And here's the poem. I love how clean my favorite taxi driver keeps his car. He rubs dust out of the crevices with his fingertips. Of course, it's extraordinary. He simultaneously drives and wipes the dashboard with a rag sitting in the front seat. He darts his eyes left and right, peeks in the coverboard, wipes away the grime, and then repeat. It's extraordinary. Diligent with his time, conscious of the unnecessary, creating meaning and cleanliness and finding joy in its fragility. I love how clean my favorite taxi driver keeps his car. It gives me faith in humanity, a visual representation of resilience in the simplest of ways, a tiny feeling of significance in an everyday kind of way, a preventative touch, potentially reflective of his experience waking up day to day. I think that consistency is what makes someone's life extraordinary. I think that fragility helps us find intention in our everyday. I love how clean my favorite taxi driver keeps his car. He peeks in the coverboard, wipes away the grime, and then repeat. It's extraordinary. Nah, my queen. All right. Would you like to close us out?
So I will close you guys out. I actually write a lot. I don't share it often or ever, because a lot of the times it's kind of just me rambling. I talk a lot. And so the last piece I wrote is more just kind of musings I had over a journey. Yeah. So if I had to give it a title, I gave it "Listen to the Plants." All right. So sometimes I also think I'm really funny, so I hope you guys laugh when if you feel the need to laugh, please laugh. It will make me feel okay. So sometime in 2019, I began a career as a full-time plant murderer. It was accidental, and sometimes you don't really learn your full skill set until you reach adulthood. So I was surprised to find at 28 and a half years old that I had an undeniable talent for murdering any houseplant I tried to grow. I watched my aunties, specifically Helen, grow these beautiful, lush green spaces in the middle of New York, where there are literal months where most of the green dies. Clinging to Helen and all of the other ancestors who had moved on, I bought these 12 houseplants online, determined to create my own green space in the city of Philadelphia. And in honor of Helen, I named the largest, prettiest plant after her. And it's co-plant PD, because that's what she called my Uncle Perry Dove, her life partner. So beginner plants, they said, easy to care for plants, they said. And I don't know which plant went first, but as I watched the leaves of those photos turn yellow and eventually brown, I panicked. I killed Helen and PD, and no amount of YouTube or houseplant websites could reverse my talent as a certified killer. I had whatever the opposite of a green thumb would be. Of those 12 plants, 2 survived and only 1 flourished. And it does something to you when you have to bury your auntie plant. Because I was busy and because it was hard, that was more than enough to make me forget my dream of the green space. But in February of 2020, emboldened by the fact that they were only $5.99 at Aldi's, and I need to spend money on things I don't need, I purchased 2 hanging golden pothos. And upon being thrust into my home for the next 6 months because of the big bad, I purchased a ton more. Prayer plants, a monstera, a money tree. I had nothing but time and attention to devote to these plants. This mic is bothering me and I project. Can you guys hear me? I prefer no mic. All right, cool. So we're gonna do it like this, all right? I had nothing but time and attention to devote to these plants. I desperately needed to devote that time and attention somewhere. Something had changed, and while the death normally took place inside my house, by this time the stench was everywhere but. I watched as the disease of violence snatched a bunch of my growing babies, children who we would consider green. By the end of the summer, I had 19 plants. Now, the nature versus nurture argument has been around for decades, and as much as I would like to say that I was able to escape my murderous ways, there are some things that never leave us. But in my devotion to keeping those plants alive, I learned to listen to the lessons that they were trying to teach me. Number one, nothing can grow without the right amount of care. We often ignore the signs, overwatering here and underwatering there. But if we do not change course and give people and ourselves what we need, they simply cannot live. Number two, pay attention to the roots. The base of all growth is a healthy foundation. Growth and life are impossible without healthy roots. Just because the leaves are green doesn't mean there isn't something brewing underneath the surface. Be diligent, peel away the rot so things can heal, cleanse so growth is possible. Number three, things will not grow on our time. There is an order to how things are. And as much as we want them to be different, it is what it is. Things happen in the time and order in which they are supposed to. Number four, regeneration is possible with proper pruning. Sometimes things need to be cut away and broken down in order to regrow and multiply. It can be scary to cut out pieces we love, but we risk blight by failing to do so. Prune. What will grow in its place will be much more beautiful. Number five, even with all the love and care we give, we are not in control of other living things. Things die and we have to let them go. This needs no further explanation. And number six, flowers aren't necessary in order to have beauty. Sometimes joy comes from even the most simple houseplants when we accept them all for who they are. All right. Yes, if you've ever cared for a plant, you know I'm not lying. All right. And if we're talking about growth, and I'll end on this, those two hanging house plants that I purchased, right? They were little babies, barely over the sides of the pot. And now they are from my ceiling and they're curling around on my floor. So the majority of those plants that I did get that summer, they're mostly alive, and I'm very happy for it. All right. All right. Thank you guys.
All right, Professor. Okay, so what time is it?
Yeah. Just do briefly.
We have like 15 minutes. We're fine.
You good?
Yeah, we're good.
I'll do just 5 minutes.
Yeah, take your time. No, this is where the real talk begins.
It has begun since 3. I'm telling you. So yeah, thank you so much. I think I'll try to cover briefly few terms and few movements, sharing also some of my research on negritude. So the first term that I really wanted to start discussing, because this idea of having this lecture came from this quote of the Black Pan-Africanism. Black hair is a root of Pan-Africanism. So if you think about Pan-Africanism, we can say it's the struggle of the people of African descent against enslavement and colonization. And if we think about slavery, we can also look at some of the resistances, the way to resist, this oppression. And we had rebellion, we had suicide, we had, a lot of resistance in plantations. We had a lot of movements, including Back to Africa movement of Marcus Garvey. And we also, thinking about, Pan-Africanism, I think it's important to talk about Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, as, a thinker that really focuses on African history and culture. And his book, The Souls of Black Folk, has been really the base really of, you know, starting thinking about spirituality, common interests that, you know, people of African descent share, common, like the idea of unity, right? And unification, because it has the people of African descent have been really like spread all over due to colonization, slavery first, and then colonization. So from Pan-Africanism, and I'm just like transitioning a little bit to now my research, which is, the Harlem Renaissance firstly, because when I was a student at UCAD doing my master's thesis, I was interested in the Harlem Renaissance. And I was looking at, you know, like how Harlem in the 1920s, 1910s, 1920s were really very attractive to the Black community, right? And how it acts like a magnet, you know, really attracting a lot of people. And it was more of like, you know, different parts of the African Black history that were really celebrated through literature, you know, culture, music, arts. So like I had a brief idea, a general idea of Harlem Renaissance when I was doing my master's thesis here. And then from there, I was like, this is interesting, you know, it seems like every time that the Black community, like internationally, have been really like spread all over, but there's just a special way of like unification and attraction and common interests and, you know, in different ways, right? And so that's what actually brought me to, when I was doing the Harlem Renaissance, I was specifically looking at Du Bois's notion of self-determination, right? And from there, I transitioned. When I went to the US, I was doing another master's, and I focused on the Negritude Movement, which is, the Harlem Renaissance, I'm gonna tell you, it's the 1920s, you know, celebration, an ideological, philosophical, cultural movement that was in Harlem, New York, right? It was during, after the First World War, you know, after the Great Migration North, really like a good timing for Black people to come together and then celebrate their Blackness and their identity, which has been negatively defined, negatively, you know, like just, you know, given any, like all those negative, you know, like definition. So from there, I focused on the Negritude movement because I saw, you know, Harlem is in New York. Yes, it attracted a lot of, you know, scholars, you know, Black thinkers, you know, redefining who they are in a system that has always, you know, kind of isolated them, defined them as the other, you know, as, you know, all those negative connotations that it had. So when I was doing the Negritude movement, which is, I think, another form of Harlem Renaissance, I believe, but it's more in the Francophone world in Paris in the 1930s. So Negritude really is a movement that, you know, in Negritude, you have the word nègre in French. And in French, when you are called sale nègre or nègre, it's really bad connotation, like it's insulting to you, right? So these group of scholars that were in Paris in the 1930s that had spaces to discuss, you know, who they are, their experiences in France, right? Came up with this idea of saying, you know what, you call me nègre, okay, I'll accept it, but I will change the meaning. I will change everything that's negative about this word and then make it a positive word and define myself and redefine myself and rewrite my own history. So that's what they were doing in Paris, you know, publishing in journals about, you know, Black internationalism and all those, you know, like big topics that really Black people needed to reflect on, especially the heritage and your identity. It's like something personal, but at the same time, it's something that you share with the community of people of African descent. So, but what I did specifically was that I was asking myself, where are the women? in this movement, you know. I said, you know, it's amazing that I thought about Leopold Sedar Senghor and the culture and how he really represents, you know, the culture of like universal civilization, basically openness, you know, to others, but also knowing yourself. That's amazing. But I also really wanted to dig deeper into finding the women's. And the first question that came to mind when I was doing my PhD was, you know, was there maybe there were no women in Black women in Paris at that time. Right? But I said, no, that's not possible. I'm sure that, you know, because France was giving some stipend to, you know, the excellent students, you know, I knew that some women traveled to France, some women from the Caribbean, some women from Francophone Africa. But whenever I read, this book in 2002, it's called Negritude Movement. I read it. I didn't see any single name from like a Francophone person from Africa. Francophone Africa. It was Martinique and the US and Paris. So I said something is missing here. So I'll start, you know, doing my research and really focusing on what women brought. And what I found out was that, you know, the women actually were the one that created the spaces. For example, Paulette Nadal from Martinique created with her sisters the Clamarc Salon. And the Clamarc Salon was kind of a house, a very welcoming space where Black people in Paris could come and just, you know, share their feeling of loneliness in this, you know, mainstream. It's a big city, but they feel lonely at times, right? And she really was part of those women who created that space, along with Suzanne Sedel, along with her sister Jeanne Nadal. So a lot of women were present there. They were participating, sharing, and publishing essays in journals, but we barely talk about them. So that's why I came up with this term, Negritude Feminisms, and in my dissertation, really looking at, you know, how these women take the definition of negritude in a very practical way. Basically, they are doing negritude. So when I say they are doing negritude, what I'm saying is that negritude should be taken as more than just a praxis, like an idea, but it's like it's an action. It's something that they really acted upon. And the examples that I'll give you is that these 4 women that I focused on my dissertation, Paulette Nadal, who's from Martinique, when she was in Paris, she did Clamarc Salon, you know, the journal La Revue du Monde Noir, she published in La Dépêche Africaine, in so many journals, right? And almost all the essays bring back the question of the position of the woman in the discussion of Black identity, right? So, and then after her time in Paris, she went back to Martinique and created a journal, La Femme dans la Cité, because she understood that it's important for women to be active in the political sphere. So she said women should vote. You should be involved in the decision making. So that's how you could change some of the decisions. Don't just stay home. Okay, so you have to be active. And then we have Suzanne Sedel, who is actually the wife of Aimé Césaire, one of the 3 most known thinkers of negritude. I mean, if you think about the masculinist idea that we always have about movements, the first names that come to mind are male names. So Suzanne Sedel was also active in Paris, but then went back to Martinique and created Les Tropiques with Aimé Césaire, right? And she was doing a lot of the editing, a lot of the, you know, like writing the letters to the governor, saying that, you know what, we are going to publish about our everyday experiences, because that's what we are. You know, we are not just 100% white. We are also African, because we have, you know, like we are also Indian, right? We have our ancestors that we need to recognize in our writing. So, and the 2 other women that I focus on are from Senegal, and one of them is Annette May Derneville, who is the first Senegalese journalist. And I got the privilege to interview her and then talk to her about her experience in Paris, but also in Senegal. In Paris, she was part of the Clamarc Salon. She was friend with, you know, all the big names. And when she came back, what she did was that she transformed her house into a salon, right? So she used to just welcome people to share, discuss, you know, because that's in conversations that usually change happen. So, and Aminata Sofal was like the younger in the trajectory, like in the 4 women that I'm looking. And in my interview with her, we were talking mostly about, you know, her being anti-feminist according to some Western thinkers, because she creates female characters, but she punishes them sometimes, right? And they're like, she's out of the box of feminism. Like, she is not doing what feminist people should do, feminist scholars. And she told me, Korka, you know, if they think I'm not a feminist, it's okay. I'm writing about my community. I'm writing for my community. I'm writing about the youth. I'm writing about everyday experiences that we can learn from to move forward. I'm not writing for people to check boxes and then tell me what I am. And that really is not like, it was just like something that really captivated my attention. So, overall, you know, I'm gonna conclude here. What I believe is that negritude is still going on. And it's not just, you know, theory, it's not just years, it's practical solutions that we have to our everyday problems. And Aminata Sofal's book, Little Bana, for example, was rejected for 3 years because the publisher was French and said there was nothing French in this book. It's like the main character's name is, I forgot the name of the characters, but he's Senegalese, and then all the names are Senegalese. So this is nothing familiar to me, so I can't publish it. She had to wait for 3 years before getting it published. And she said, because she didn't want to change any of the content. So overall, what I'm trying to say here is just really, there has been connections, there has been, you know, feelings of reunion, feelings of, you know, bringing together our hopes, and it is possible. That's what I think, you know, as youth, you know, that's why I focus on these women, and because they brought something into the table. They didn't just, you know, take everything for themselves. So thank you, everyone. I hope it was long.
No, it wasn't.
I tried to be short.
No, it's perfect. Thank you. So basically, Professor Korka's work is amazing, and you should read it if you have the time at one point. So what I saw as a lot of the through line between our work is this interest in art. What Professor Korka is talking about with these salons and different community outlets and points of engagement, you can see in the nice blue circle. Partially in part what I wanted to highlight is that through writing and activism during the Negritude Movement, Black women were able to find liberation, and they were able to liberate other people because of their art and because of that space and that form of thinking. And Professor Korka does an incredible job of listening why. Yeah. Okay, so this is my little section. Black hair. So if you see here, when I was building out the slides, I was like, Professor Korka, take this wherever you want, right? And I genuinely do want that and love that. And I think that as well, I saw some through lines between our work when we think about these three topics of language analysis, identity formation, and then a cultural reframe. So one of the cultural reframes that Professor Korka mentioned was this idea of repositioning Francophone women writers in the Negritude movement, right? If we don't hear their names, then how can we make that possible? So in my work, and what I hope to be doing for the next 6 years is talking about Black hair and doing more research on what that means from an African-American sense, from a Senegalese sense, from an African perspective, what is the through line of that work? So specifically, I wanted to dive into the Black is Beautiful movement, which happened during the 1960s. Professor Korka just mentioned the Harlem Renaissance, which took place in the 1920s. So it kind of fuels into Black is Beautiful, because a lot of the movements that were happening there were started in New York City. So if you look to your right, you'll see Angela Davis rocking a beautiful fro. So figures like Angela Davis and my grandmother, who had her fro in the 1960s, were rocking their afros. And at the time, during this Black is Beautiful movement, I found this idea of beautiful very interesting. Why beautiful, right? We hear things like Black power. You hear Black Lives Matter. Why in this case was it about beauty? And what does that mean in this context? Why beauty? Like, why is that important? So I focused on the Black is Beautiful movement. And to this point of identity formation, I studied scholars like Angela Davis. During this time, during the 1960s, when Angela Davis was rocking her fro, she was using it as a politics of liberation. So she was like, I'm wearing this fro because I believe in freedom for Black people. I believe in a point of advocacy. I want you to look at my hair, and I want you to look at all that I am and all that I come from. And I don't care if you like it. And that was what she wanted. That's what she was trying to just like walk into a room and just like piss people off, honestly. So and that's what she did. So in that conversation, marketers at the time saw Angela Davis rocking a fro, and they were like, okay, like how can we make money off of this? So what they started to do was create what scholars now call a politics of fashion. So they said, okay, like people seem to like this Afro thing going on. Let's cater to the Black market and make it interesting to them. And in doing that, they erased what Black hair means, what comes with it, how some women don't get jobs because their hair is like this, how some women don't feel like themselves, or some people don't feel like themselves because their hair looks a certain way. The hair that grows out of their head isn't what fits a Eurocentric beauty standard. So they turned Angela Davis's politics of liberation into a politics of fashion, which completely erased what she was trying to do. So what I want my work to be, and what I'm hoping for it to become, is to reposition the politicization of Black hair as a form of dialogical art. Dialogical art is art that's created with a point of to create protest. So it's art that you intentionally create to spark change. Dialogical art. And I was like, when I learned this word, I was like, oh yes, this is so cool. So I would like to reposition the politicization of hair. I think there's a combination that we can do and that we can see and that needs to be revealed. This politics of liberation and politics of fashion should be seen as not the same, but at least on the same pathway, right? If we begin to see a politics of liberation and a politics of fashion under the same realm or umbrella, I believe that the growth that I would like to see and be a part of, that I would like for all of us to be a part of, is that thought, is that next thought, right? What does that mean? What does that spark inside of us when someone's hair can change how we view the world? And of course, in that, dialogical art then ties into the idea of agency, political agency, social agency, and individual agency. And if you look again at the blue circle to the right, I love these circles. Okay, so the art that I wanted to express is that through hairstyling itself is a form of art. And I believe that Black people can be liberated through this form of art as well. And the change that I would like to see and be a part of is finding art that's similar to this one. Okay, so we are nearing the end. And how are we doing? Are we okay? We're good? All right, cool. Okay, so Professor Korka, I have so many quotes that you've said just written in my journal. I'm like, oh, believe in your natural power. Like, you got this, Lord. So a beautiful quote that you said was believe in your natural power. And I wanted to play a little bit of our podcast that we have, an episode that I was very grateful to do with Professor Korka. Okay, I'll figure that out at one point. But in the meantime, so the episode is about 5 minutes, and I was thinking we could just listen together, and then we go right into sharing and talking. So I hope you enjoy.
There are certain things that are so important in life.
Is that okay for sound?
Of humanity. I'm looking at you as a person. I'm looking at you based.
Should I try it on my or what?
How you look. Hey! Okay. All right, let's go. Yeah. Make you loud. There are certain things that are so important in life.
Yes.
Time. The value of humanity. I'm looking at you as a person. I'm not looking at you based on how you look, based on your skin color, based on your accent. I run a lot of workshops, like when I was at UMass, I was part of student organizations just to try to motivate people, especially those who are from underprivileged groups. Tell them that, you know what, you're worth it. You have so much to bring in this world. Please don't let these standard whiteness rules kind of characterize who you're gonna be.
When did they know? When did this happen? Like, when did you realize? When did that click for you?
When I was in my house in Senegal as a young girl. It started there. It started in my house. It started in the way that I was brought up. It started with my father not being like the violent man as, you know, like the authority of the house. I never seen that in my house. I lived in a very peaceful family where conversation, like discussion. You know, discussion can happen even it's just one person speaking. Our father taught us the respect of the other opinion, but also taught us how important our opinion is. You know what I mean? I do know. It got amplified as I grew up. You know, when I was in Senegal, I used to be a student and find a job. That's rare to see in Senegal, especially for girls. You'd be like waiting for somebody to take care of you. And I'm like, I'm not waiting for anybody to take care of me because I can take care of myself and my needs. I already know where I am going. I know it.
How?
It's a feeling. I think it's like a strength that your parents need to teach you. Your interaction within like not just family, but like people that you interact with. They will have a positive impact on who you are, on your confidence. That is just there. Like, and I have been, you know, like that's so present in my family, so present that like a lot of things in this world wouldn't amaze me that much because I'm like, they were not born with it. You are not born with something.
Yes.
You work to get it. We were talking about how this podcast was born, right?
Correct.
Was it the same like today? No.
I would never imagine.
Yeah, right? It was an idea that you had. And then you were like, why don't I try? That's what I love. I love when people believe that they can do it by themselves. I love when you believe in yourself because you have a natural power to decide what your life will be tomorrow. With a little push of mentors, of people pushing you, and a lot of role models that you're looking at to kind of copy. You just get there. Like, I am so proud to say that I am my mom. Like, my mother didn't go to school, but she taught us so much. And even like growing up, I'm never like, I don't hesitate. I'm like, this idea is cool. Let me pursue it and see. If it fails, that's okay. I'm gonna try again or try it in a different perspective and see what happens.
Okay, so first off, that was beautifully said, and thank you for sharing all of it. Thank you. Another thing that I've been trying to work on and work towards is trying to understand how our personal narratives help us understand, you know, our goals or what we're drawn to. I know that your research. I would love to hear more about your research. I know that you do work on Pan-Africanism. You've done work on Negritude, double consciousness. All these kind of keywords we hear if you read any African American studies work. What do they mean to you and your decision to devote your life to understanding them in relation to your story?
I think what I mean to me is, first of all, my identity. Because if you always hesitate about who you are, there's a problem for you to find ground. You need to be grounded first. You know, to know who you are, to know what you want and why you want it. You know, and growing up in Senegal, I would speak Fulani in my house and Wolof and say that with my friends. At the age of 7, you go to school, boom, it's French. And I'm like, why is this? This is not right.
Yes.
This is not how it's supposed to happen. Because I'm learning about Louis XIV in France and I'm learning about French history. Why?
that's when I was like, I can't get enough of Professor Cork. Okay, that was easy. Okay, cool. So I'll just mosey right along. Okay, this is our last slide before we get into some sharing, and I want to hear from you guys and what you think or any new thoughts or anything like that. So this is a suggested slide by Professor Korka. She was like, I think you should put a slide together, with all of your goals. She's like, this is good practice for you as a PhD. We want to know, we want you to do an elevator pitch and be able to say things concisely. And I'm like, oh, okay, here I go. So I came up with about 6 sentences together, which is maybe too much. So research goal, ultimately, I hope to be known as a scholar who fearlessly advocates for the marriage of academia and activism as a shared space that can more consistently elevate the intersectionality of marginalized perspectives, specifically in the 19th century, for African and African-American culture and beyond. My research question that I'm really excited to dive into this fall is how can the materiality of hair act as an entry point to examine the various modes of expression throughout the African diaspora? And now it's your turn. Yes.
Hi, I'm Katrina Jeffries. I'm here working with an organization called Redes, which is part of the Eco Village movement, but I'm also a colleague of Lauren's through an organization that we participate in the United States. But I recently heard, I love the subject of your PhD and all your research. I recently heard something where someone was talking about the idea that Black hair is acceptable as long as it's laying down. When people, and this is, a woman was sharing her encounters. She said, when our hair defies gravity, it makes people uncomfortable.
Ooh, I like that saying.
And that is when it's laying down, we can find gravity. They are more accepting of us. I would just love to hear some thoughts or any kind of reaction from people for that, because I myself had long locks for many years, and now I'm back to my little fro. So yeah, please.
Yeah. Does anybody from the audience want to respond to that before we talk?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Kassan. Your attention on because when the last presenter gave the statement coming from Kassan to believe in your natural power. So if you listen to what Dr. Korkasal said, you see that this comes from privileged families here in Senegal. If you have a father who is pushing, if you have a mother who is pushing, it is because your father was well educated and your mother was well educated. But if you don't listen to education that you received, they did not have the same education. Because I grew up in the village, but when we were at the primary level, many of the most famous statements coming from the population is showing that the scholarship of or the education of a girl is not so important. So what you believe your natural power is repressed by society. So society is telling you what you have to believe, and your beliefs do not count concerning the beliefs of society. So the problem is that most of the women in our societies who managed to be on the top this time, it was because they come from well-educated families where the father and the mother were educated. They went to school. So this is something that I would like to mention. Korka, you were lucky to have a father who was open-minded, who decided to transgress some of the boundaries that society limited to women in many societies. And this is not a specificity of Senegal or Africa. It was a worldwide element in societies. So if you see the first sentence by Elizabeth Cady Stanton when his father told her, "I wish you were a boy." It shows that being a girl in our societies, it means that there are some limited spaces or places that you have to stay and not to step or to overstep these limits. Thanks so much.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to thank you so much for highlighting that. It gets really tricky to start to understand. Sorry. Sorry, Jen, I was looking. Okay, perfect. No, thank you. So do you mind if we go back to Katrina's question and then go to Janai? Okay, cool. So Katrina asked initially, what is this idea of like hair having to lie down? Right. So a part of that is like braids, right? These lie down. My hair is not in its most naturalist form in terms of being in a fro. And I think to your point, you asked exactly what do I think of that conversation, or why is that conversation happening? Or, I think a lot of things about it. But I think mostly everyone should be able to do what they want. I want everyone to be able to rock whatever style and feel whatever they feel in my ideal world, right? But we don't live in my ideal world. Most of us don't live in our ideal worlds. So I think in this context, I know that there's a lot of activism, research, and policy going on that is advocating for Black women to rock their natural hairs that defy gravity, like the Crown Act. The 2019 Crown Act is all about protecting Black women or Black people in the workplace, specifically for their hair. So I know that this is a conversation that's evolving, and I think it's a brilliant point that doesn't get talked about in that way enough, right? It's not even like straight versus curly, or straight versus kinky. Now it's lying down versus being up, taking up less space versus more space. Like, what does that mean? What does that make us feel? So I think that's a really good point. Yeah, Mary, do you?
So, like, add on what you said, only other question, I wonder if this is like the notion that Black hair has to line down in the natural stage is related to the politics of fashion we're talking about. Because when you have to make like Blackness more palatable in a capitalistic world, it means that it in some way has to be palatable to a white audience or an audience with economic or social power. So if that audience is more comfortable with Black hairstyles that lay down, and that kind of politic of fashion has co-opted the original motive of like embracing Black hair, I think this is the outcome.
Yes.
So I think it's important to point out like that part of like Black is beautiful was wholly co-opted and commodified. And that's what happens. Like you become super interested in having hair that lays down and perfect slicked baby hairs, which is not at all the point of like embrace
the actual conversation. Like the fact that there's even like literal legalization, like that blows my mind. There's actually a law that people are trying to pass that says that me and Korka and Mary can go to any job we want with the hair that we have. A law.
That says a lot in terms of like, like the standards. Going back to the idea of like, if you even think about Pan-Africanism and identity, like representation matters, right? How if we let you grow your hair up tall, like you would be very visible You know what I mean? Like anyone entered the room, people sitting behind you won't be able to even see, right? So your presence would be really felt, and we don't want that. You have to be hidden. You have to be, like not present. You have to be really, really absent. So your hair is the problem, because if you want to grow it natural and make it grow as if like you're trying to fly, or just be like, you know what I mean, unique. Your uniqueness is something that really kills, the vibes of standards and what beauty should be and what representation should be and what is professional, what is not, all those questions. And I think you shared an article with me with like Hollywood actors and always having problems with their hair, right? So sometimes they have to do their own hair before even like going to film, like the thing of the film, right? Because there's nobody that can manage their hair. So then their hair is the problem and they are the problem. They bringing a lot of difficulty to the life of the producers. So I think that's really interesting. And it's just always like the uniqueness and the presence that people like try to kind of hide. Yeah. Okay, cool. Katrina. Okay.
I was just going to say what's really powerful listening to this is subliminal messaging is amazing. Lie down versus rise up. Nobody has to say a word. Yep. And what it does is it informs how every Black woman steps out of the house every day. And so when the gentleman back there mentioned you were raised by an open-minded father, I first thought of myself, oh, I'm open-minded. But then I caught myself. I'm open-minded because I was raised by my colorful Nana. So even though as an open-minded father, there's always a woman.
Yes.
And I just wanted to make that point, but this is really brilliant, that lie down versus rise up. I think we got to focus on that a little bit.
And even I think going back to John Faye's question, it's to me, like seriously, it's like both of my parents didn't go to school, right? And why? For my mom, it was automatic. Like the answer is that you can't. You are a girl. What are you going to do at school? And I grew up in that household with my grandfather. My aunts stay home. My uncles go to school, right? And high school was the limit. And university don't even think about it, right? Even for boys. So my dad growing in that environment, raising us, and my mom having not been to school, but also have these amazing ideas about humanity. Like you are a person full of potentials. Go for it. You know what I mean? She didn't go to school, but she had. That's why I think to me, education is a word that's really tricky. Is it a formal education that you go to school to have, or is it in the household that you have that education, or is it a combination of both? You know what I mean? So yeah, I've been lucky to have, parents that are really open-minded, but I also grew up in the societal barriers of like what a woman can do and can't.
Good afternoon. Thank you both for this wonderful presentation. My name is Ola, and I'm here with many wonderful students and professors from SUNY Geneseo. And so, all right, yeah, okay. So we're from New York, and this room, maybe there's other countries represented, but like our panelists, we have United States as well as Senegal, and I think there's so much for us to share across the ocean about what Black hair means to us. I'm new to Senegal, and I haven't yet had, even with you, Korka, opportunity to understand what does Black hair mean in a Senegalese context, especially, where the majority of women here are Muslim. So I want to know the conversation about hair, but you asked for stories, and I'm a storyteller, so I've got at least 3.
Yes. Tell us.
Especially with Black hair, because like you, Katrina, had locks, for 10 years after having my hair burnt, my ears burnt as a kid, because my mom was trying to lay it straight, you know, and then finally she realized that my spirit wouldn't have that. And so I had braids for 10 years, and then I decided I was gonna lay it straight, and I didn't know how to take care of it. And then it broke off, and my mom told me to cut it, and I had a nervous breakdown. And then I cut it, and Chimamanda Adichie writes this in her book Americana. She has a moment after her hair also breaks, and then she falls in love with her afro, and there's just like a moment like, you know, these beautiful curls that are growing straight, you know, straight up into the sun. You know, African people have a very significant relationship with the sun, and our hair grows towards it. So and then I had locks for 10 years. And then after my father died, I went to Ghana and I cut it off. And then the first thing I did was I went to the ocean. We have so much significance about our identity that's tied to our hair. And I think it's something that to the gentleman's point about society, you know, a big question is like, how are we able to control in the sense of our choosing our own identity, to allow our hair to be an extension of ourselves, just like our cloth, just like our cooking, just like how we speak, everything, you know, and to say that it must lie a certain way and not how we see it is an assault on our spirit, you know, and what Black women, if anything, as Malcolm X and Beyonce recently said it, you know, that in the United States context, an assaulted individual is the Black woman. And it's because of our power of storytelling, your Nana, my grandma. And when we sat down here, one of my students said, I don't know anything about Black hair. Tell me. I'm like, well, you have Black hair. But I understand you're saying from a woman's perspective. And first thing I did, I came back here and I said, so ancient Egypt, we can go all the way back to Kemet and see afros, locks, braids, you know, but these are not quite often seen when we're reading our histories, or the histories that we're not taught about, as you mentioned about French history, you know, same thing for us with American history. We're not taught complex Black history. So just know, you can Google it. You can find it if you Google Sheikh Anta Diop here. This man did so much work to show us about who we are in that context that, you know, I could look at a figure thousands of years old and see the afro that I'm wearing or the locks that I'm wearing, someone staring back at me, that is not present is so phenomenally violent to how I can understand myself. Two other stories. One, I went to Dubai with my aunt. She took me and we were in the hot sun and she was wearing a wig and I had my locks and she just was sweating and she says, Ola, you know, you got your locks, never change it. You know, she's like, I've been doing this for years, since the 60s where, you know, you have to lay it fresh. She's a Nigerian woman. And I could see for her, it's like, I can't consciously let go of this wig, but since you never do it, you know? And that was her suffering and her trying to wish no suffering on mine. And then I had another student who graduated from our school last year who she came into my office her sophomore year or junior year, and her hair was, you know how we understand looking a mess. It's not that it's like my own or anything. It's just that it doesn't reflect her beauty the way that she would want it. She said when she came in, her hair was a big fro, and that people around her were at a predominantly white institution, told her they couldn't see the front from there, and so she cut it to conform. She didn't just cut it, she also changed her name. She did many things to conform, and it dampened her spirit, you know? So when you talk about this, like hair up versus hair down, you know, I just think it's important that we're thinking about our response to our society, how our communities respond to our society as well, and even tell young women. I've had locks at a time where you could not have locks for work. By the time I graduated, locks were okay. my fro as it is, even me, like, Katrina, you have your hair just as I put a little line because we have to say, oh, it's a little feather, even though it's messy, because I got tired of combing my hair the first 2 weeks here. So, I just think that the story really is just how do we attach it to our identity, because our hair shows how well we're doing, if we're ill, if we are healthy, and that's and our hair is our art and our art is our culture. So that's it.
Thank you. Try to make like 3 points very succinctly. The first one to standing up and laying down. I think that a lot of one of the things that I always tell people is what makes me most bitter about racism is that I always have to think of myself as Black as opposed to being able to think of the human story. So it doesn't matter who you are. Human beings are challenged by things that are different. And so assimilation becomes the norm. Almost every other person's hair naturally lays down. And so me and Lauren kind of spoke about something like this the other day, like with the staring or with anything. A lot of the times, like we have these conversations very inwardly towards Black people, but none of these things would be conversations if it wasn't made a thing by someone else. Because the reality is that all of us as human beings, when we see people who are different and we see things that are different, it's not about their difference. It's about what their difference means for us and who we are. And so a lot of times when I see something that's different from me, or I won't use me, I'll say us, because I know that plenty of, what does that mean about me? If this is how this person is, and this is how this is perceived, and this is this, then what does that mean about me and who I am? And so when people refuse to assimilate and conform and do those things, it becomes a threat to ourselves. And I think that there's a big part of it that fits into that. Because when we talk about like standing up and laying down, and I hate to even use the word traditional, you look at old photos, people have been doing things to their hair for centuries, including Black people, including people on the continent, before white folks was around and before everybody else came. Like, people just do their hair, and hair is never just hair, because even if we take away the race, there's the gender aspect, there's this aspect, there's that aspect, but a lot of those things that we place and the way that we're thinking about it, we forget that aspect. It's just, when things are different, it's a threat to us as humans. And that is just the human story, period. So that's one. The point that I was trying to make here, I feel like has already been made. Very happy that you said your parents, they have education, because I, identify as a political pessimist, and I'm never going to speak like, we know that privilege and all those other things exist. But, I was born to two parents who never graduated high school in the States. All of those things are true. But that's the difference between like natural power and external force and control. And we know that sometimes natural power does not overcome external force and control, but that doesn't mean that it's not innately there, whether privilege is a thing or not, whether any of those things are a thing or not. And so with natural power, you have to be willing to wake up and say, despite the external control, this is the natural power I have within me to do whatever it is that I'm going to do. I think that I'll just leave the 2 points. And that's it. Mic drop.
Hi. Actually, well, my name is Gaeta, and I'm a sociology and psychology double major at SUNY Geneseo. And before starting to speak, I would like to say that I really appreciated and enjoyed your presentation. And I have a question for you. So I know that social media is trying to reinforce Eurocentric beauty standards. Like if you Google beautiful girls, all you see is 10 white girls with straight hair and a bunch of makeup. I actually have it on my phone right now if you guys want to try it. Like I literally do. Let me show you. Like you Google beautiful girls, all you see is white girls. And we're in the 21st century. And not even talking about the Kardashians, who are the most popular. And we also know that some, to not say many, Black men prefer girls who want to look like white girls, like girls who use perm for their hair, or girls who use skin bleaching products, like girls who aspire to become white but can never be white. And we also know that professional settings and professional people are put in place to kill Black identity through Black girls' hair. And so my question is, how do you mentally face and handle those settings, systems, microaggression, and prejudices in a world that is taking so long to change? How do you face all of those struggles?
6 years. Okay.
I mean, you're black
What's your
forever,
name?
So my name is Gaeta.
Gaeta.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.
Gaeta. So my dad's here today, and we got lunch yesterday, and he said, "Oh, I just can't believe you're having this presentation, whatever." And I'm like, "Thanks, Dad. Thanks, Dad." I'm like, whatever. And he's like, "No, think about it." And I'm like, "Okay." And he reminded me that when I first got, and I was like 18 years old, and I was on the floor, and it was the end of the world, because when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. I think of that person, and I think of that now, and it's the same person. And my dad said this in his own way. He was like, you have all of these things. What TV shows you watch or what you Google, right? Who I love being today. The time, but I guess that's just how this human stuff works, right? Everything else is just extra.
That is never appreciated. It's the situation.
I'm going to share, my experience being in the US with my 3 girls and figuring out how to do their hair because there's no beauty salon that can do African hair. So I had to learn how to do it and do it myself, right? And I had to constantly talk to them about the importance of their hair, of how they look. Why do they look the same way? It's a predominantly white town and university, and they interact like with, 90% of people that look differently. So I think that constant reminder and reconnection and redirection of, our thinking, saying that, what, we have to step up and say that, this is what the world think about beauty. This is the standard. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to believe in it. I can find my own way of doing it, right? It's going to be hard 10 times, right? So we do everything 10 times to be normal, but it's worth it. I would spend the weekend on doing their hair so that Monday when they go to school, they look, their hair looks perfect or normal to other people, right? So that they don't feel isolated and alone. I think that it's really like painful to go through all these like mental, struggles. But I think that's the secret that what really kept Black beauty until now. So for those who have never been in Africa, really what I think should be, a strength for them is really thinking about spiritual connection with their ancestors who have been denied, just humanness, just being human, who have been taught to that your hair, you can't even comb it, right? You have to have, it just needs to look messy, but that's the normal thing, right? You don't need to pay attention to your hair because you're not a human being. So even if you haven't been physically in Africa, you already connected to Africa in so many different ways. So do your hair whatever you feel like it and just don't care about what people think. It's nostalgia, but it's a good nostalgia because it keeps you going, it keeps you struggling, it keeps you, human.
I love that. No, don't turn that off just yet. I got a question for you. Okay, so a question that was asked, I think relates to what you're saying as well. Professor, what can I call you? Professor Nobar asked specifically the Senegalese female perspective on Black hair. So you spoke about the nostalgia that American Black women or Black people may feel. Do you mind touching on the Senegalese perspective as well? And a little bit?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's very interesting because I think in Senegal, so when we think about hair, we are still living in neocolonialism, and we are still, believing in beauty standards being lighter skin, longer hair, even if it's a wig that keeps you like sweating the whole day. You know what I mean? You have to look that way. And it's hard for like the younger generation to really go back to like their natural hair and see that this is beautiful. And I think recently, like a couple of years ago, we are really starting to rethink our definition of our hair and how it should look like. I know that in Senegal, we do amazing braids, right? All the time. I have a lot of friends from Nigeria, Ghana coming to Senegal. They're like, we're going to do our hair there. They have, nice hairstyle, and just amazing, braids and whatever you want your hair to be. And now it's really going back to like the most natural possible, even for the kids. I have my sister, for example, last week she brought the kids and was like, I'm tired of extension because their hair is short and I don't want to leave it short. So I'm going to do little dreadlocks for them. And that's the style now in Senegal. So we call it sister locks. So we do have few, new ways to really celebrate our hair in its natural state. But also we have an overwhelming, influence from the West, from the, world beauty standard, which is like when you Google, what do you see? People tend to really they're very conscious about that representation, and they want to copy it. But hopefully and luckily, and I think I'm very optimistic about it, in the last few years, we've seen a lot of, rewind, going back to, like my natural hair. which is, I think in Senegal, when I came back, it was a big hope for me because I have so many places where I can bring the girls and then they know what to do with their hair, right? I don't have to worry about, bringing them and people are like, oh, what do you need? So coming back to like the space where we have a lot of opportunities to really like get back to our natural hair and redefine who we are, redefine, beauty standards. It's high time for us to do that. And it's time also to balance it out because we can't just keep taking everything. We have to produce, we have to think, we have to do different things. So I think like for the Senegalese, like in the Senegalese context, at least from my experience, is that there has been a balance, there has been a mix of, like white beauty standards with like, African. But Senegal also is very, very like, forward in terms of like creativity with like what to do with our hair. So much so that, a lot of, African, a lot of people from the sub-region would come here, for example, to do their hair. And I love when I see that, and it's really interesting. But yeah, I think I don't have a really like answer to it, but I think it's really something that's like ongoing and few changes happen here and there. And I'm very hopeful that it's actually, really like getting stronger and stronger every time.
Now, I wanna, if it's okay, I wanna like focus on what you said, how you're like, I don't really have a reaction to it, just because I remember when I was interviewing Alioune, hi Alioune, I asked him, and Alioune's like very relaxed and I'm just like, and I'm like, okay, Alioune, what is the Senegalese perspective on Black hair? And he goes, Lauren, or like, Al, can I be honest with you? And I'm like, duh, like, yes, please. And he's like, we don't think about it. And I was like, what are you talking about? Have you heard of the Crown Act? Like, and it was just like another like moment of like, wow. I think to your point where you're like, that's all I can really say. We're really advanced and it's really beautiful. Like, wow. Like, so I think that distinction and understanding that difference of how hair is being processed in the States versus hair is being like in a mental capacity, being processed in Senegal, being processed in Africa as a whole. What is it like to wake up, look to your left, look to your right and see people who have the same hair as you? Mm-hmm. What does that do to you? Like, how do you feel about yourself from that? And I think like, it was so simple and very Alioune, but it like changed my perspective on what am I doing here and what do I want to add to this experience. Mm-hmm. Professor!
Okay. Thank you so much. My name is Mamadou Bojan. I'm a political scientist at UCAT, but also I work here at work as the coordinator of the Fulbright project with Aline. I want to ask a question related to the politics of hair. Because we talk about hair, but I think there is another dimension because also it's part of our identity. But I think identity is something constructed that change over time. And I think that we are constantly tinkering with our identity, which is somehow determined by our encounters, but also other influences. We're never the same when we meet someone else, when we interact with others. We learn from them, we take something from them, but also we give something. Is it possible in this world of exchange where we give and we receive, keep a certain authenticity when it's come to identity, including hair?
Interesting.
So that's the question. The other one is, how do we construct our identity? And I've, Korka talk about basically this idea of returning to our heritage, including hair. But I think there's also another claim for identity that challenge this colonial heritage based on another identity. Veiling is also a way of saying to, what we see elsewhere, that this is not what we like. We don't want to be like women, because I've been following all this narrative on women, veiling, as opposed to, telling you how you should dress. So it goes both sides. I don't want people to tell me how I should dress, but I'm also free to dress the way I like, including veiling my, wearing a hair scarf. So it's very complicated, and I think we have to also put ourselves in others' shoes to understand why they act in a certain way. But there's also a pragmatic also dimension, right? You are in Senegal, you cut your hairs in a certain way, you go to a job, you get a job, and you know that keeping your hair that way it can be a disadvantage. What to do? Are you gonna keep your identity, or are you gonna negotiate? How do you navigate your identity in a context that run against what you're claiming? So these are questions that goes beyond claiming a particular identity, but it also brings the question how you navigate, how you negotiate your identity within a society. So that's my contribution.
No, I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, my main thing is I feel like that's a beautiful place to end after we answer that. Oh, I'm sorry, Laura.
I can tell you later.
I just didn't want to keep you guys. I could sit up here for hours, but well, to your point on negotiation and what that means, what immediately comes to me is with questions like that, where there's no direct answer. There's no right or wrong. I try to lean into what feelings come up when I hear things when Professor Corcus says, believe in your natural power, right? What are some of those thoughts that can carry over into a question like that? And it brings me to the point of balance, to a point of patience, in terms of understanding, we're negotiating who we are every day we wake up. And I feel like it's hard to make that choice. Sometimes it's not a choice. So that's like one area that I wanted to respond to. And then a different area was this idea of just cultural respect. And I don't think you called it that directly, but that's how I'm starting to understand it, being in a space that's not my own. How I see it as an American Black person is very different than how it could be perceived or how it's being offered to me in a different context. And my job and my interest is not to deny that or to make it my own, right? How can both be true? So how can we live in a space where I can be comfortable in who I am in that day, and then also make sure I'm respecting the culture that I'm stepping into, knowing very well that it's not mine.
And I would just add the personal responsibility, because there's a responsibility on a personal level. Like individually, you have a responsibility to really look into yourself, ask yourself some questions like, who am I? What do I want? How can I get it? What are the people around me? How did they get, whatever they got? You know what I mean? And accepting that, failure is part of the process. That's okay. You know what I mean? My identity is evolving. I constantly struggle with that, right? Staying 9 years in the US and then coming back to Senegal and then, you know what I mean, having kids and then family relations and everything. Sometimes it's so different and then navigate. It's just like a constant, balance that I try to get into, how do I really define who I am in this environment? And one thing that really helps, I think, is that to live in the moment and then just, accept of being human. You know what I mean? You don't have to define yourself today as A and that's it. You're like, no. It's okay if today I think this way and tomorrow maybe I've read something somewhere that really changed my my perspective. Maybe it doesn't change me as a person. I'm still a Muslim Senegalese woman, you know, a wife and a mother. That doesn't change. But some of my views, the perspectives that I have on things may have changed, and I accept that. You know what I mean? In L'Enfant Noir, Dark Child, Kamara Lai talk about le monde change, like the world changes, like the monde bouge. Everything changes, so you have to go with the flow, yes. But I think at some moments you need to stop and then try to find yourself and ask yourself some really key questions about who you are. Because if you accept everything that's given to you, then there is a problem in terms of like your individual responsibility as a human being in this earth. You have something to bring as well as receive. You know what I mean? It's not just one way, it's two ways, right? It's a circle. It's a different, you know, whatever shape it is, accept that, but learn and then move on, learn and move on. I think that's like one of the things that really helps me, but it's a very important question that, you know, it's hard to answer, very complex. Maybe the last question, and then we can wrap up, right?
Cool. Aliun gave me the mic, so I'll try to be brief, just tutti. I guess I just wanted to add a couple of observations from my experience living in Senegal the past 4 months. It's been interesting sharing space with my students, talking about hair, and multiple of my students have asked, well, don't you want to get your hair braided here? Like, why don't you get your hair braided? And I thought it's very interesting offering to braid my hair. We can sit down and do it right now. And I think that's very, to me as an American, like that was definitely like do not do that. Like as a white woman, I will not be braiding my hair in the same way that my Black friends do, out of cultural respect. And I think like it seems to have there seems to be a different perspective. And I also see like a lot of particularly white women like coming to Senegal and then getting their hair braided. And to me that I guess my question, something I've been thinking about is like what is that difference you were talking about earlier, like the American versus Senegalese perspective on hair braiding. Anyways, I have more thoughts, but luckily I'm gonna spend the weekend with you, so we could just keep talking. No,
I'm just kidding.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation too, and for your time. It's really been a pleasure.
No, thank you. Do we want to? Okay. That's tough. Oh, well,
she wants to go.
Yeah, Janai, please go for it.
Here. I don't need my time for that. So what I would say is you talk about the difference, and I feel like we had this conversation too. I can't speak for Senegalese people and what they do. I think the difference between the United States, y'all love Solange, but there's Solange when she drops her beautiful album, A Seat at the Table. There was a song on there that talked about being mad, right? I have the right to be mad. I have the right to be mad. Mm-hmm. And for Black, like, everybody talks about moving through race, and you talk about like how we go through it. Sometimes I curse people out. Yep. Like I'm not always gonna go through it gracefully. Yeah. And so Senegalese folks, as Black Senegalese folks here, have a very different lived experience when it comes to those things. Yeah. And that's not to say that you guys, because all of us can be agents of white supremacy. You see it in Jamaica where they ban locks in some schools, and it's not them. That's the thing. The connection is different because over here, y'all are always going to be minority. And we talk about sharing and giving and taking, it's that. But for me, where I am, in my little bubble of a couple million Black American folks, the connection is different. The connection is different. Yeah. Because Senegalese folks can go their entire, lives without seeing a white person and having that connection to their hair in the same way. Me, on the other hand, at work, hearing all types of crazy comments, feeling the need to make my hair look a certain way, and to do this, and to do that. So now, that certain movements have been co-opted. And now that people can pander to us, and now that all of these things are nice and palatable, I don't want to share with you. Because what you can ask me for, I want to share with you. And that's me. I'm not the nice, graceful, oh my God, let's hold hands or something. That's not me. I'm dead. And I think that because of the, yes, I am. Yeah. Rightfully so. And I think that because of the proximity in which we live today, it is a little different. And
proximity.
Because we don't get to just, I wish it could just be praised. Like I wish that. I wish I could just feel like Alonzo and other people. You understand what I'm saying? Like I wish that I didn't have to feel that way. Because it's like, I wish. But we just not there yet. We're just not there yet. And I think that that's the difference. Yeah. And it's not for me to speak and say something these folks are doing or whatever. That's not it's not bad. You guys are entitled to feel how you want to feel. You want to share that aspect of your culture, you can share it. But for me, because people still literally make fun of our grades, it's like no.
All right, cool. Thank you guys so much. I'm never gonna forget this moment, and I just really appreciate you all being here. Cool.